Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kuderna podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kuderna. Before we dive into today's episode, I'd just like to remind everyone if you can please like, subscribe, and share wherever you're listening or watching today's show. We always appreciate that. That's how we keep spreading the good word as we pursue wealth in its original meaning, a state of well being. So, who is today's guest? Today, I'll be speaking with Wes Csorba. If you're not familiar with who Wes is, I'm going to give you a quick bio and then we'll get into today's conversation. Wes Csorba is a trusted advisor to some of the world's most influential leaders, including Fortune 500 CEOs, U.S. presidents, governors, and global nonprofit heads. He's a former White House official and longtime senior partner at Heidrick & Struggles, the world's leading executive search and advisory firm. Wes has spent the past 3 decades at the epicenter of leadership, decision-making, CEO succession, and boardroom transformation. He's got a new book out, and it's called Aware, The Power of Seeing Yourself Clearly. It's a bold, timely call for leaders to embrace self-awareness as a strategic advantage. Drawing from more than 75,000 assessments and exclusive interviews with industry titans such as Jamie Dimon, Darren Woods, Chris Wright, and many more, he reveals those blind spots that can derail even the most successful leaders and executives and the mind shifts that are needed to lead with clarity, compassion, and conviction. Wes's thought leadership is rooted in some deep experience. He served as the special assistant to President George H.W. Bush and advised on senior appointments to the State Department, the Department of Defense, and key ambassadorships. His first book, Trust, The One Thing That Makes or Breaks a Leader, was a foundational text on character-driven leadership and praised by leaders across both government and the private sector. Wes is also a founding board member of Bettering Human Lives Foundation. It's an energy industry-backed nonprofit that provides clean cooking solutions to communities living in energy poverty in Kenya, Ghana, and Zambia. You can learn more about Wes at his website, www.wescsorba.com. And you can learn more about his firm, Heidrick Struggles, at www.heidrick.com. I'm going to put both of those in the show notes, so if you forgot, don't worry, it'll be there for you to click on. But without further ado, please join me in my conversation with Wes Csorba.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Kuderna Podcast.
But without further ado, Wes, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you for making some time. I mean, that is quite a bio I read there. It sounds like you've done a lot of good things and really met with some movers and shakers.
Well, thank you for that. That was overly generous. But yeah, I've always been fascinated with leadership and been a student of leadership really, all my life, I guess.
That's pretty cool. I mean, there's either leaders or followers or people that don't know which they are. How did you know, like how far back could we go where you said, you know what, I'm really inspired by leaders and it became something that you wanted to study and practice?
Yeah, probably started in government. I had graduated from the University of California, Davis in the mid 80s, moved to Washington, D.C., was very fortunate to work in the White House. And as it happened, worked in the Office of Presidential Personnel, which, at the beginning of an administration is a very busy office because you're staffing 3,500 positions. And as part of that team, I just loved the interaction with people who wanted to serve their country, move from the private sector into the public sector. And everybody has a story, a gift, something that they bring to the table. And so from that point on, I just wanted to be around leaders. And then, of course, that led into the headhunting or executive search business, which I've been doing now for the last 32 plus years.
That's pretty cool. And so how did that come about? Like, were you being trained in like psychology, kind of getting in people's minds? Like, as you go into any government office or even the White House, can you tell us kind of what that play looks like? Are you interviewing people and then providing recommendations to the powers that be? Or like, what is that? How does that back and forth work out?
Yeah, my background wasn't in psychology or anything like that. It was actually, I've always been fascinated by history, political science. I was attracted, to Washington, D.C. I'd interned there one summer in college. And so I got involved in politics, if you will, and worked on the campaign when President George Herbert Walker Bush was elected, and was very fortunate to be a very junior aide in the White House. And so I think I really didn't have the background and the training other than, being around people and assessing leaders and recommending them for the right position in the government. I would say, to the second part of your question, our process was pretty fascinating. Obviously, we would work on an assignment for the president. I worked in the national security affairs area, and so we would have to present options to the president. We'd have to shortlist those options, high grade those options, and then ultimately send a decision memo to the president for his approval, which would then initiate the background checks and the vetting that we would have to do for any, obviously high level government role.
Did you ever feel like you ran into an issue where the president or whoever it might be calling the shots either discarded what you said or maybe went in a different direction where you were kind of like, please, I'm like imploring you, don't pick that guy?
Well, all the time we would send back in the day, this was back before you had all the technology that we had. So we would literally type up these decision memos and present it to the president, and it would come back with his personal handwriting, suggesting somebody else or crossing out a name, So, but he usually had pretty good instincts, and usually steered us in the right direction, and we'd have to do a little bit more hard work.
That's really cool. And how do you feel? I mean, obviously a lot has changed, since he was in office. I think politics has kind of such this, it's this great thing, but obviously most of the public today doesn't have the best kind of opinion, we'll say, of politicians. Did you feel like a lot of the folks that you were maybe vetting just wanted to get in that office? Or did you feel like a lot of the people you were looking at really did want to be of service? Maybe like, what are some of the ways where you could kind of figure that out if somebody presented really well, that they want to do well for the public, but maybe they had ulterior motives, or maybe they had something kind of self-driven there? What are some of the strategies to kind of pick that apart?
Yeah, that's really an insightful question, because it's one that I grapple with today and apply sort of in the corporate setting. I mean, particularly working for somebody like President George Herbert Walker Bush, integrity and character and having a servant leadership mindset was paramount. So we did have to weed out those that may have been angling for a job just because of the power or the influence of the role, and really focus on those that were trying to focus on something bigger than themselves, namely the country. So that was an important vetting part of our process. And I'd like to think that for the most part we got it right, but it's because of who we work for. I mean, that was sort of the expectation, is you didn't want to promote or recommend prima donnas or those that were in it for themselves, but actually put the country first and the president's agenda first, ahead of their own, personal ambitions. And frankly, that's true now, I think, even in the corporate setting, and why I think the whole theme of self-awareness is so powerful, particularly today.
Yeah. And kind of in that same vein, I mean, would you use personality assessments, or what were some of the tools? Was it a one-on-one interview? Was it a questionnaire? Like, did it get very psychologically driven, or what were some of those things to really see who was the right person?
Well, back 35 years ago, it was kind of, the old fashioned way of assessing candidates, which was, personal interviews, obviously being very thorough on referencing. And then, frankly, how they managed themselves through the process is also very telling. So we didn't have a lot of psychometrics that we relied on back in the day. And even though today we have a lot of incredible tools to assess candidates and leaders, they should never be determinative, right? They should be just one factor among many. And I'm a bit old fashioned. I still like to obviously talk to references, and how that leader showed up in other previous situations. And frankly, how they manage themselves through the process, and how they did in an interview, face to face, I think is still paramount.
In just another question, because kind of things come into mind as you share that. I was listening to an interview recently with Tom Brady, where the host had asked him, which quarterback today in the NFL reminds you most of yourself? Who has that it factor? And they were kind of leading him like, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, naming some of these. And Brady said, those guys, like, I think they have it, but I can't say that they do until I've seen it. And so for that reason, he kept going back to Patrick Mahomes was really it. And the only reason why is because he's seen that he has done it. So, like, when you look at some of these folks that come across your desk, is it about the resume? Is it about what you can say, hey, they've done this? Or do you wait more to like, okay, I'm getting a vibe from this person, or they're coming off like they have the potential, even if maybe they don't have that resume yet?
That's a really insightful question, because I read the same thing about Tom Brady recently, and I think one of the reasons he was so successful is because he was a team guy. He wasn't a Tom Brady guy; he was a team guy, and he talked about how he would celebrate always, in the end zone with his team, and I think that frankly is the way I like to assess a leader. If they're transparent and forthright about maybe the areas where they're not as strong, and certainly talk about their capabilities as well, and how they rely on their team, and they don't use the personal pronoun, I, me, my, and they really talk about how we, accomplish something together. I mean, I often use the illustration of, Jordan Spieth. It's Jordan Spieth, the PGA golfer back in the day. He would always talk about how we managed the round, referring to his caddy, Michael.
Okay.
And I just think that says a lot about a leader. It shows me that, they're just not full of themselves. And it kind of goes back to my finding in my research and my experience that the best of the best leaders have this unique combination of incredible self-belief without the self-absorption. And if the confidence and the humility, which if you think about it is really hard to pull off without
Yes.
high self-awareness.
Yep. Yeah. And I know we're kind of on the sport thing, but I remember hearing Joe Paterno once talk about some of like his athletes that maybe they lost it on the field. They got thrown out of a game. They got a big penalty because they were just too overheated. And he said, I want guys with that confidence that can step in front of 100,000 people, and they've got to have a bit of that bravado there. I'm sure he wasn't, speaking about everybody, but it is true. It's like, it's hard to get that level of like undefeated confidence without having someone that feels that way about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if you look at some of the most admired leaders today, they have that unique combination. Jamie Dimon, at J.P. Morgan Chase, he's an extraordinarily confident guy who has a lot of self-belief, but he's still working on stuff. He's got the humility to say, I need to be empathetic at times, or I need to clean up my language, because he can be very blunt and very direct. And I just love the idea that somebody like a Jamie Dimon and many others are still working on stuff. And that just, that really resonates with me.
Can that go too far? Like, I feel like sometimes you can go down a rabbit hole of whatever it is of self-improvement where you get almost too critical. And maybe you did hit what was near like your optimal level, and then you started messing with it maybe a bit too much. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you don't want to over-index or get involved in kind of what we might call the self-analysis trap, particularly in front of, your troops or your team. So you got to manage that in the right way. So you got to pick your spots and determine when it's appropriate to be vulnerable and transparent about some of the things that you're working on. But privately, even if you're not talking about it publicly, you should be aware of the things that you could be developing. If you're a people pleaser, which is a very predominant blind spot in corporate America today, always kind of making people feel good about themselves and keeping the peace, you've got to constantly be looking at opportunities to develop more courage, to have, direct conversations and not beat around the bush. So that doesn't mean you talk about it all the time. It's just that you're aware of it. And it's like anything else. It's just like, going back to the athletic or the sports metaphor, the more you exercise that courage muscle, to engage that flaw, let's say people pleasing, the better you're probably going to show up with your team.
Understood. And that might be kind of a good lead in there to your new book that's coming out soon, Aware, the Power of Being.
Out.
Or it is out now. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Just
I've got the outdated press release here.
yeah.
So it's called Aware: The Power of Seeing Yourself Clearly. Can you just kind of tell us a little bit of like the genesis of that, and what were you trying to get across from people when you say the power of seeing yourself clearly? Do you think people struggle with that? Are they lying to themselves? Are they not sometimes caring to self-analyze, or like what do you give us kind of like maybe a summary of that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of self-deception as it relates to our own awareness. I My journey was, over the years, I kind of recognized this trend that the most aware leaders. By the way, when I say self-aware, they're aware of both their blind spots and flaws as well as their capabilities and strengths. Right? It's got to be
Mhm.
balanced. But I had just noticed that the leaders that really stood out had a heightened awareness of the things they do really, really well and things they don't do well. I came across Tasha Urich's book, who's an organizational psychologist, 2018. It was a book called Insight: Why We Are Less Aware Than We Think We Are. And her research showed that 95% of us think we're self-aware, but really it's only 10 to 15% are truly self-aware. And I thought that can't be true. That is such a huge gap.
Yeah.
And so I asked our team at Heidrich to do some digging and look at our data. And so we looked at the 75,000 leadership assessments, and the number was 13%. So I
Wow.
knew that we were, at historic low levels of self-awareness, which I think can be attributed to a lot of different things, which I'm happy to get into. But I just knew that was an issue. And I thought, wow, if we can get self-awareness in leadership and in our relationships, by the way, to 20, 30, 40, or 50%, just think of how much better we would all be showing up with one another and with our teams. And so that was really the thrust of the book, and just, really wrote about it over the last year and a half to 2 years.
Interesting. And that metric, so that 13% number, is like, can you define that? Is that a disconnect between what they're scoring versus what like they're saying, this is who I am, or how do you get that
Yeah.
number?
Yeah. So, Brian, what you would do is you do your own self assessment.
Hmm.
You answer a series of questions about, how you're showing up in different areas. And then you would do a 360. So you'd get the assessment from those that work with you every day, right? Your peers.
Oh, okay.
And then you take the
Gotcha.
two lines, and if the lines closely mirror each other, then you have high self-awareness. But if there's a huge gap between the lines, on a graph,
Huh.
then that's the gap. That's the lack of awareness.
Got okay. So what's actually proving it is like the assessment from your peers or your coworkers.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. I imagine. And do they see that? Like, I assume like they take your exam or self assessment, and then you say, "Hey, here's the news." Like everybody else is telling you something different.
Yeah, so when we debrief with a leader and we show them the results, that's an important meeting, because how they respond to it tells us a lot about
I bet.
their capability, right? If they argue with the data and say, oh, you could have recut the data and talked to different people and it might have come out differently. So if they're defensive and they're argumentative, then I would say they don't have as much potential as others. But if on the other hand they look at it and go, wow, I need to change. I need to really reflect on this, and then we come up with a plan, a development plan on how they can begin to close the gap.
Got it. And how do you deliver that news? Because I imagine for some high powered CEO, that can be a humbling experience to say, "Hey, I think X," and everybody you work with every day is telling you why. Like, what do you do there? I imagine that for some of these people with maybe a big ego in the room, there would be a lot of pushback there, like you said. How do you kind of navigate that process thereafter?
Yeah, I mean, and I love that you mentioned CEOs, because I think the CEOs that do the 360s on their teams, but also include themselves in the process, really stand out. They model the right behavior. They're willing to put themselves through it. I guess what I would say is, most of the time, even though there's low levels of self awareness, most leaders, particularly CEOs, have a general sense of what their issue might be. They may be too emotional, or they may be, controlling and more of a micromanager, or come across as a know-it-all, or whatever it is. It's just they don't really understand kind of some of the variables and related pieces to that might open their eyes. But by the way, to your question of how we share that information, we want it to be balanced, right?
Mhm.
We want to show them where they're really showing up well, their capabilities, their strengths, maybe even a superpower, and then also show them maybe some areas to work on, some gaps. So it's a balanced approach. It's essentially sharing truth with grace, if you will, and
Yeah.
love, not hammering them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's the process.
That's interesting. It reminds me of an episode from The Sopranos where Tony Soprano, he's the boss, and everybody's laughing at everything he says and patting him on the back and stuff. And then like one day he has this dream that everybody's not laughing with him; they're laughing at him. And all these laughter that he hear, it's not because of what he's saying or doing. It's because they're
Yeah,
just looking at the title as he's the boss and this is what we have to do. And
yeah.
then he gets like depressed about it and everything. It is interesting because I guess it's hard to kind of see the reality, especially if you have that title. A lot of people aren't going to be so frank with you, especially if their job kind of depends on keeping you happy.
Yeah, you're hitting on kind of a common theme in leadership, which is known as sort of the CEO bubble. The higher you go up in an organization, the less feedback you're going to get. And interestingly enough, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect in psychology, which is, the higher up you are, the more you think you're aware, but actually you're not. You're less aware because you're just not getting candid feedback.
Mhm.
You use the Soprano example. People, your stories are always more interesting. Your jokes are always, funnier than everybody else's. And so you got a bunch of sycophants around you telling you what you want to hear, unless you're the kind of leader that is intentional about surrounding themselves with people and voices that where you give them permission to tell you, what they need to hear. And they're approachable. They keep an open door policy. I think Jamie Dimon is one of those. He's very deliberate. There are many others.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think as you rise, as any leader has more and more responsibility, you've just got to be aware that you're probably not going to get the kind of feedback that you once did, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Hmm. And do you find some of those successful CEOs, do they have like a number two there that might be the bridge that can kind of deliver some of this data or some of this information of kind of what's going on with the troops? Almost like a Warren Buffett where you can have a debate with Charlie Munger and hear the news of like, oh wow, I didn't realize that. I didn't notice that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a great example. Warren Buffett has been very candid that one of his blind spots over the years is that he has that Nebraska nice personality, and he tended to be slow to move out underperforming managers because he was so loyal to them. And
Mhm.
so I think Charlie Munger and some other people that he had in his life were able to help him. And again, because of that awareness, I think it contributed to his success. But yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to have a board of advisors, a consigliere, if you will, somebody that can speak truth to power. I think your spouse, your partner, plays a key role in that.
Mhm.
Not that they're there every day with you at work, but they're with you, most of the time, and they're your accountability partner as well. At least that's what I've found in some of the most impactful leaders is they've got good people, including friends and spouses around them to tell them what they need to hear.
Sure. And so, kind of on that topic, what would you say are some of the common or the most common blind spot in some of these high achievers? And how do they recognize that? And like, how does that parlay over to the rest of America? Just saying, hey, I'm the CEO of my house or my own life. Like,
Yeah.
how does that translate?
I mean, I think the common blind spots among those that are high achievers, very aspirational, focused on accomplishments, tend to be, maybe micromanagers at times, maybe controlling at times. They're constantly striving and they're obsessed about, whatever the task is at hand. And by the way, those are all wonderful qualities, but, without any balance or restraint, it can derail quickly. In the book, I use the example, sort of the structure that Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik used in describing human nature. Adam 1 and Adam 2. Adam 1 is the builder, the creator, the one that wants to dominate, and that's sort of an example of the high achiever. And then Adam 2 is the one that's more reflective, and asks questions: why we're here, what's our purpose, what's our meaning. I think you need both, right? I think for those high achievers who are those Adam 1 leaders, they need a little bit more of that Adam 2 side of them to just to have some restraint and to really create a little bit more awareness.
Hmm. And do you see, like, outside of the office, like a commonality amongst them, whether it be physical fitness, having a hobby like golf or a sport, faith?
Yeah.
Like, do you? Well, I don't know if you get into that with some of the clientele you work with, but do you see something that across the board these people have?
Yeah, I do actually talk quite a bit about it in the book. And the last few chapters, I talk about these extraordinarily successful CEOs and entrepreneurs, builders of incredible businesses, multi-billionaires, and yet they seem grounded, and it's because they believe in the idea that to whom much is given, much is required. And so that the way that is manifest, Brian, is the organizations and charities and ministries and not-for-profits that they're involved in. Sure, they might have recreation and play golf and love to hunt, but there's usually something a little bit more compelling, something that's
Yeah.
bigger than them. Whatever that cause or whatever that passion is in their life, and that really grounds them. It keeps them authentic and real. And I think they just understand that at the end of the day, yes, creating wealth is important, but helping others win is even more important, right? And so, to me, those have been the leaders that have resonated with me the most. And there's that selfless character, very sacrificing, and they use the wealth and the resources they've created to build something even bigger than themselves.
And do you find that, just to kind of dive a little deeper in that, do you find that a lot happens through their work or through these outside ventures such as a charity? And the reason I ask that is, like, if you look back at like Carnegie and Rockefeller, you look at them as some of the most legendary philanthropists that ever lived, with how much
Yeah.
money they gave away, and Carnegie and his libraries, and Rockefeller museums, and all this amazing stuff that they did. But if you read their bios, oftentimes it'll say that doesn't even touch what they did with their actual work and how they advanced things for humanity, whether it was transportation or just things that
Yeah.
now we all take advantage of. Do you see people trying to do that through their work, or is their work like a means to an end, to do that other thing, that other passion?
Yeah, I mean, as being in Houston, as you can imagine, I spend most of my time in the energy business. So a lot of the CEOs and the entrepreneurs have built massively successful businesses in oil and gas and in energy. But I find that they tend to be, they're extraordinarily passionate about, what energy has done for humanity, right? I mean, lifted us out of poverty, created incredible. I mean, energy is the industry upon which all other industries can even operate.
Sure.
And so, to give you an example, Chris Wright, who is the Secretary of Energy today, before he went to Washington, he was CEO of Liberty, which is a fracking pressure pumping company. He started an organization called Bettering Human Lives Foundation, which provides entrepreneurs in Africa for low interest loans so they can create these LPG propane cooking stove businesses, because 2 billion people on the planet still cook over wood and dung and agricultural waste. And so, yes, to your point, that's an example of somebody who created an organization directly connected with the business that they're in, right? Which is to provide energy, because energy is life. And if you can provide a clean cooking stove and basically take a mom who spends 7-8 hours a day just collecting wood, just think of the opportunity cost and how it's just going to lift them out of poverty. So that's just an example. There's lots of others, but that's something that really resonates with me.
Yeah, I think if you can kind of weave the two together, that's where you find that perfect mix.
Yeah.
And that's even what I try and do personally on a smaller scale, obviously, but as a financial advisor, doing some of the writing, the podcasting, whatever, that's wealth oriented, where now they kind of tie together the day to day and some of these like ancillary projects. It definitely is easier, I could say that
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
than if I
Yeah.
was out there, building stoves for people. It's like that would be a whole 180 that it would.
It's not in your wheelhouse, right? Yeah, you got to
Exactly.
find. Yeah.
Exactly. So just to go back, rewind a little bit, you had mentioned like a lot of people struggling to see their blind spots, and that we could get into that. I imagine you're going to point to things like social media, technology, all the buzzwords. Is that what it is? Has that changed in our culture, in our society, or is it just something that humans kind of suck at?
I think it's actually become a more of a acute problem today because of everything that's going on around us. I mean, self-awareness in leadership is not new. I'm not inventing any, sort of new skill set or concept. We've always known that having a heightened awareness is critical. What's new is that it's at such low levels, as we talked about earlier. And I think the reason is, probably started back in the 80s and 90s with the self-esteem movement, just constant validation from others. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, kind of we had this narcissistic epidemic where it was all about me and what I did and what I contributed to. And then you that morphs into the social media age, the digital culture. And I truly believe that the digital culture has kind of become the assassin of self-awareness, right? We're constantly plugged in, but plugged out from ourselves. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote Anxious Generation, talks about obviously the unintended consequences or intended consequences, we don't know, but nonetheless the consequences of social media on mental health. I also think it's impacted self-reflection. We just don't have enough time, or we don't spend enough time thinking about how we're showing up with others. We've got 150 million Americans that own AirPods. I love AirPods, by the way, but they're amazing. But if we're constantly plugged in, listening to the noise of the world, and we're not plugged into ourselves, we're just not going to. It just dulls self-awareness. And then, frankly, some of the AI tools. I love AI, right? I mean, it makes us more productive. We learn so much more. There's so many amazing things about AI.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not aware of the consequences, namely, it can be very flattering, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it again, it's a validation of who you are as opposed to asking the tough questions of who you really are. So I do think the digital culture has been a major factor in the low levels of self-awareness.
Interesting. And what are some ways? I mean, do you talk with your clients about overcoming that? Do you see that in a team as much as a CEO, or is one more plugged in and plugged out than the other? And if they are, if you're kind of falling behind because of it, what are maybe some of the exercises or the things that you suggest to these people?
Yeah, I mean, the irony is all these productivity tools, they're amazing. Technology's made us more productive, but we just seem busier and busier. So you've got to be more intentional about your time. And so when I coach CEOs and leaders, I really ask them, to consider how much thinking time do they have? How much reflection time do they have? Are they actually scheduling that time, where they can just think about the direction of the business and maybe how they're showing up, and instead of doing a to-do list, maybe write out your to-be list. So I do encourage leaders to take time in solitude. Take a walk without your devices. Just lots of things that you can do. Get involved in something creative. Painting or writing or whatever it is. Running, biking, just anything that will allow you to have some reflection time and unplug from the cacophony of noises that is just crowding out our ability to really think. So those are just some of the things, a social media Sabbath, if you will, do it with another friend, right? So that you can do it together and have accountability. These are all things that I encourage. And then reading, right? I mean, I was wondering the other day, are people going to stop reading books because AI is just going to give us a summary of everything we need to know? And
Exactly.
And actually, there's something beautiful and reflective and creative about reading a book and engaging with a page, right?
Yeah.
So I just think all of these things can help mitigate what we're having to deal with in the digital culture today.
No, those are some great points. And Les, have you seen, I know you mentioned Jamie Dimon a few times. have you seen a CEO that maybe is your favorite, we could say, and have you personally taken things away, whether it's a routine, one of those hobbies you just referenced, or practices, doing yoga, reading, whatever? Have you seen something where you're like, that was brilliant, and now you find yourself marketing that to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk about several CEOs in the book that resonated with me. Most of them are energy CEOs, as I mentioned. One is a CEO who just retired, Travis Stice. He was the CEO of Diamondback Energy, which is the premium Permian oil and gas company. And he's now the executive chairman. But early on in his career, when he was a young engineer, he was passed over for promotion, and he wondered obviously what happened, and he was given the feedback that he was being viewed as using others to advance himself, and that was
Wow.
a wake up moment for him. And from that point on, this is probably 30 years ago, he decided that he would be completely devoted to being other centered and being a servant leader and investing in the community. And as it turned out, he had a son who had a disability from very early on, and so he obviously invested in taking care of his son and getting involved in the community, and for him, his church, his ministry. So I just find, and by the way, 30 years later, he became one of the most successful CEOs in the industry, created 970% total shareholder value during his tenure. So,
Not
I
bad.
mean, incredible, incredible shareholder success, but even more, just an amazing human being, and just what he did with his family and in the community. To me, that centered him. It's not any one of these things about reflecting more or any of these these tactics. It's just how he lived his life and how he continues to live his life has been a model for me, and I think for many others in the industry.
That's awesome. That is really cool. And I wanted to ask you kind of about that. Do you see, in your experience, what distinguishes leaders who achieve success from those who go on to live really significant lives, like you said? Have you noticed that? Did one go hand in hand with the other, or not always?
In terms of what's the differentiating factor between
Yeah,
their
the guy
success?
versus the guy that kills it in the headlines in the Wall Street Journal versus the guy kind of like you said, that CEO that maybe is just at peace with himself and with his
Yeah.
family. Um, I I imagine that's got to be kind of rare to hit a home run on the work and the life on that balance scale.
Yeah, I think they're the CEOs who obviously create incredible value, but they have this idea that they want to leave the place better than it was when they got there. And
Mm,
by the way, that includes succession planning, which sometimes is not always done the right way, but making sure that the succession planning process is a successful one, and they have no ego and pride in it. In fact, they might recommend somebody who might even exceed their own success. Right? They
yeah.
have that kind of humility. So I think it's a grounded humility in making sure that you're other centered, and at the end of the day, you know, I often like to say that when we're all kind of, in our last hours, on our deathbed, whether it's in a hospital or at home, and we've got family and friends surrounded, we're probably not going to be talking about that deal we did 20 years ago or that great piece of property that we once owned or that car. We're going to be talking about faith, family, and our friends. And
Mhm.
so if that's what we're going to be talking about when we're dying, shouldn't that be what we should be living for when we're living? And I think those
Yeah.
CEOs who do that well, to me, just stand out from the pack.
That's such a great point. Yeah, I mean, I could make that a quote right there. So I guess in closing, one of the things, well, one, I want to ask you kind of my own question that came to mind, and then one that's more relevant to your book. The one thing I was just thinking as we're describing all this, I feel like we view culture, at least I know I do, through just the lens of an American. These things you talk about of, are we self-aware? Are we finding our blind spots? How are we doing that day by day? I don't know if you work internationally, and if you do, like, do you see culture to culture that there's another culture really hitting it well, or is everybody kind of going through the same things right now?
Yeah, I really didn't do the. That's really an interesting idea. I didn't do the cultural, analysis, country by country or region by region to determine who's more self-aware. My guess is that this is sort of a universal issue. It's human nature,
Hmm.
and wherever you live on the world or work in the world, you're dealing with some of the same issues, right? The digital culture and technology and the busyness of our lives and how you just manage all of that. So I think it's just something we need to be aware of and on guard and be mindful that um, our awareness may be dulled, our relationships, the quality of our relationships may be um, compromised if we're not reflecting, if we're not taking the time to reflect and consider feedback we've gotten over the years, the things that we do real well. By the way, and I don't want to sound so pessimistic because I do end the book on an optimistic note, which is, we need to really understand what we do well, because if we can
Hmm.
do that well, understand that well, and we can turn it into a superpower, we can do incredible things, with the
Yeah,
time that we've got left. And so that part of awareness is even more important, not just to constantly beat ourselves up and engage our flaws, but to leverage our strengths and become, incredibly impactful, and create a business or a not for profit or
yeah,
whatever it is. So I do want to emphasize that part of awareness as well.
sure. Yeah, I always say the same thing too. It's, pitchers out there, they don't spend a lot of time in batting practice. They
Yeah.
they work on throwing a ball all day long because that's what they're so good at. So if we could pivot real quick, one of the most favorite segments of my show, at least from what I hear from guests, are our lightning round, where we get to know you, the guest, a little bit better. So is that
Sure.
okay if we just dive
Yeah.
in and fire you some
Sure.
questions?
Okay.
So we'll get started. First off, what is your favorite book?
Oh gosh, there's so many great books. Probably recently, this book I referenced a few minutes ago by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, The Lonely Man of Faith, which is this battle between Adam 1 and Adam 2.
Hmm,
That I don't know if that's my favorite of all time, but it's the most recent.
got it. Fair enough. And if you had a quote to live by, what would it be?
I think to whom much is given, much is required. I think it implies living a grateful life and making sure that you're blessing others with everything that you've been blessed with and even more.
Got it. And do you have a favorite movie?
Probably Chariots of Fire.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And I assume you've done a good bit of travel, whether for work or pleasure. Do you have a favorite destination or vacation?
I love the city of Jerusalem. I think it's it's the most magnificent city on the planet. Of course, I'm biased because Budapest, Hungary, which is where my parents and my family's originally from, is very sentimental to me. So my wife and I like to go back to Budapest as much as possible for sentimental reasons, right?
Hmm.
So those are two that come to mind.
Okay, great. And do you set an alarm in the morning? And if you do, when is that set to?
Well, it depends if I'm going to run or not. So
Okay.
if I run early, I try to get up 5:30 at 6 and get in an early morning run. And if you're in Houston in the summer, you got to do it really early, right? Because it's just really hot.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's probably around 6.
Okay. And
Yeah.
this show, it all started as a finance show. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what is the best financial move you ever made, monetary or otherwise?
Financial move probably when I started to realize, 15 maybe 20 years ago that just stocks and bonds and equities, it's great to have obviously a diversification of those assets, but real estate, really starting to think about some of the real estate that we acquired has really been obviously beneficial. So that would be the one move. Yeah.
Okay. And do
Yeah.
you have a worst financial move or worst investment?
Um, well, it's kind of a two sided coin there because I lost a little money on crypto early on, but my son is now full time in crypto, and he's taught me how to have a balanced portfolio, and it's actually done pretty well recently, as you know, in the last year, right? So,
Yep.
but you have to be sober minded about it and think through it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That can be a roller coaster at times.
yeah.
And then the last question for you here: if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Gosh, I just I just think that if people were kinder to one another and assumed the best intentions on people instead of the worst,
Mhm.
um, we'd all get along better. We wouldn't have the geopolitical strife and some of the relationship issues and some of the, frankly, polarization that we have in our country right now. So just more kindness.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for making some time today, Les. This was really interesting. I think people have a lot of takeaways that they can even bring into their own daily lives.
Thanks, Brian. Enjoyed being with you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Kuderna podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kuderna. Today, we had the pleasure of speaking with Les Csorba. Be sure to check out his new book, Aware, The Power of Seeing Yourself Clearly. And I'll leave information in the show notes to that as well. And be sure to like and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. We'll see you next time. This podcast is intended for the general public and for informational purposes only. The show does not provide any recommendations or investment advice regarding any specific account type, service, strategy, or product, or to otherwise act in any fiduciary or other capacity. Please contact a financial professional for guidance and information that is specific to your situation. Brian Kuderna does not provide tax or legal advice. Please contact your accountant or legal advisor to discuss your situation. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Kuderna Financial Team, and opinions stated are their own. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. References to specific securities, asset classes, and financial markets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a solicitation, offer, or recommendation to purchase or sell a security. Brian Kuderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. OSJ 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey 07003. Phone number 973-244-4420. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Kuderna Financial Team is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0K04194.